Yeah, my name's Mark Lee and I'm an organic farmer from Shropshire. When I was asked to do this presentation, I was really thrilled to be described as the farmer with the corn buntings. As you can see on that first slide, that it's just a little brown bird, but it's a red list bird, a severely declined farmland bird, and they do really well here. We're really proud of them and we really treasure them. Today, I'm hoping to cover the three things on the right: our farm and how it's changed, what we produce here and how that fits into a healthy, sustainable diet, and how UK farming and diet could change and be much better for us and for nature. Our farm's not a large farm, and in some ways it's typical of an English family farm. We have good land which can produce a range of crops or livestock. Thanks, Michael. Next slide. Real change here on this farm started from what was previously a very ordinary grain and beef farm, began with the decision to convert to organic farming in the late 1990s. In basic terms, organic farms are not allowed to use synthetic fertilizers and pesticides, which are so normal and embedded into conventional farming. This changed everything for us and required a completely different whole farm system approach, where we have to try and prevent problems before they develop. Put simply, we aim to produce food whilst as far as possible mimicking natural systems and working with nature. A couple of examples of this are rather than using insecticides to kill pests, which can cause huge damage to many non-target species, we have a diverse rotation and encourage beneficial insects who naturally control them. On fertilizers, we don't have access to synthetic fertilizer, which is made with fossil fuels. We have to grow legumes. Legumes are plants which naturally fix nitrogen from the air into the soil, which other plants can then take up. Examples of legumes are beans and peas, but there are leafy legumes too, clover being the best one, and we grow loads of it in our crop rotation. In nature, diversity is the key, but modern intensive farming has for 60 years now largely relied on controlling or excluding nature in order to maximize output at huge cost to biodiversity. We follow the principle of land sharing, where food production and wildlife share every single field on our farm. Whilst the elimination of pesticides and fertilizers has had a positive effect on nature here, it's also reduced our yields to around 65% of non-organic levels. Cost of production is therefore higher, so organic premiums are necessary in order for us to be viable. Next slide, please. Becoming organic also made this farm and our produce much more interesting, and that's allowed us to get much closer to our customers. This started in earnest in 2012, when, having become frustrated with growing dry peas for animal feed, we began producing higher quality peas, specifically for human consumption, for a wonderful company called Hodmedod's. For the first time, as you can see on the image there closely, this put our name on the packaging, the food packaging, and it allowed us to use social media to interact directly with the people who were eating and appreciating our peas. This was wonderful, and it really changed us. It inspired us to find shorter supply chains, which allowed us to maximize our crop value, whilst also selling to people who could trust us and appreciate what we do. Next slide, thanks. Our largest crop here is oats, and we grow oats for a company called White's, along with a group of just 30 other organic farmers in the UK. This trusting relationship we have with White's is excellent, as are their wonderfully nourishing porridge oats, of course. Next slide. We've also become specialist milling wheat producers, growing around 20 different types of wheat, most of which are heritage, but all with unique qualities for baking. We sell our wheat directly to millers, bakers, and pasta makers around the UK. Next slide. We've also localized some of our sales by investing in a very small French stone mill so that we can sell flour directly to local home bakers. As you can see, it's a very small mill and it's really not a commercial enterprise, but much more importantly, the mill and the flour have allowed us to connect more closely with local people and school groups, get them onto the farm more and give them a greater understanding of how our system works. Next slide, thanks. We're a mixed farm. We also keep sheep for lamb sales. This is really important, as the sheep graze the grass and the clover and the other crops that we grow to build our soil health and fertility. They move around the farm rotationally with our crops and are an essential part of a system which produces nutritious food, is carbon efficient and looks after nature. For example, invertebrate numbers soar in the presence of grazing livestock. Vegan diets are currently attracting a lot of attention, but I feel strongly that our meat-producing sheep make a key contribution to producing the rest of our plant-based food sustainably. Grazing cattle and sheep in the UK, ruminants, are frequently accused of being a major cause of climate change. My view is that this can be a dangerous distraction from the more serious causes, and that when correctly managed, ruminants have a really important role to play in sustainable farming systems like ours, which serve to be part of the solution. I think we also have to be very careful to try not to solve global problems locally or even nationally. For example, a lot of the images used are photographs taken from other countries or indeed other continents around the world, highlighting worst practice globally, but they're often used by some of the media to criticise UK production. I do, however, have a very different view of intensive cereal and soya-fed livestock, mainly pigs and poultry, which certainly bring very cheap food, but in many cases, serious environmental damage. My belief, as with many others, is that less meat, but better meat is the way forward. Next slide, thanks. The growth of regenerative, more nature and soil-friendly farming is really encouraging and should, of course, become much more widespread. Under current government policy, organic food is often perceived to be more expensive, but in terms of nature, I think it should be seen as the gold standard. We're really proud of the way this farm has evolved, the food we produce and the biodiversity we support. But of course, we're not typical. The vast majority of farms are conventional, with organic farms covering just 3% of the UK's farmland. Organic food remains relatively niche. There's an enormous range of farming, of course, over the other 97%, with some working very positively for nature, as you've seen yesterday, whilst others are sadly causing serious damage. There's no doubt that diets need to change for our health and our environment, and the way we farm in the UK has to change to reflect that. We desperately need to address food waste, but we also need to eat less meat, particularly intensively farmed chicken and pork. More of our beef, lamb and dairy should be from graze systems on mixed farms, with less from upland areas, which could become much more nature-rich. Farmers can appear to be very rigid, set in their ways, you might say, but in many cases they simply farm in the way policy and demand has directed them. If government policy was better and demand from consumers changed, I believe farming could change too. I think many people would change their diets in a positive way if they had the information they need to make better choices. Information, honesty and communication are the key. Next slide, please. If we consider just this farm, I'm sorry, there's some very small text on this slide. Our outputs in terms of portions of nutrient-rich food are represented here. You can see from the blue bar that meat makes up less than 1%, milk, which is produced from the surplus forage we sell to a neighbouring dairy farmer, 23%, with the remaining 76% plant-based. I think this gives a good indication of how the production of a small mixed organic farm can contribute to a balanced and nourishing diet while supporting nature at the same time. Next slide. The most important word in my presentation is diversity. We have a diverse farm with diverse outputs, which could contribute well to a nutritious, healthy and diverse diet. Restoring nature requires exactly the same thing, diverse farming, giving rich and varied habitats, which with fewer pesticides and lower intensity could allow space for wildlife to thrive to the benefit of us all, not least the wonderful little corn buntings. Thank you.